Hello. Just waiting for it to go live. So tonight, hello, there we go. Right, so I'm live and I'm going to do a Bible study. And so we finished chapter 6 of 1 Corinthians last week, and we're moving on this week to chapter 7. Now, there are 40 verses in this chapter, but we'll get through them because tonight we're going to do verses 1 to 9. Okay, and so without further ado, we'll get on with it. So last week we talked about the differences between sexual sin and addictions, other addictions that don't affect the body the way sexual sin does, and how important it is to stay pure. And this week it's expanding on that theme of purity, only this week it's to do with marriage, singleness, self-control and purity. Okay. And so I'm going to read 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 1. So verse 1. Now as to the matters of which you wrote to me, it is well, and by that I mean advantageous and expedient, profitable and wholesome, for a man not to touch a woman, to cohabit with her, but to remain unmarried. So he's speaking to the believers at the Corinthian church because there was a lot of immorality going on in the church, and Paul the Apostle was upholding the standard of the Lord that basically they're not to live in sin and not to touch a woman unless you're going to marry her. So not to touch a woman, to cohabit with her. Now that's a habit that this world has gotten into. Doesn't respect marriage, just live together, but marriage was created by God, and sex was created for marriage alone, and sex outside of marriage is fornication, which is what we talked about last week. So here in this week, Paul is addressing the immorality in the church and giving them guidance about how to behave as a single, how to behave as a married, and what to do with sexual temptation, and how to stay pure. So Matthew Henry says about verses 1 to 9, the apostle comes now as a faithful and skillful casuist to answer some cases of conscience which the Corinthians had proposed to him. Those were things whereof they wrote to him, as the lips of ministers should keep knowledge, so the people should ask the law at their mouths. The apostle was as ready to resolve as they were to propose their doubts. In the former chapter, he warns them to avoid fornication. Here he gives some directions about marriage, the remedy God had appointed for it. He tells them in general. Number 1, that it was good in that juncture of time, at least, to abstain from marriage altogether. It is good for a man not to touch a woman, not to take her to wife. By good here, not understanding what is so conformable to the mind and will of God, as if to do otherwise were sin. I didn't get that, I'll just read that again. That it was good in that juncture of time at least to abstain from marriage altogether. It is good for a man not to touch a woman, not to take her to wife. By good here, not understanding what is so conformable to the mind and will of God, as if to do otherwise were sin, an extreme into which many of the ancients have run in favour of celibacy and virginity. Should the apostle be understood in this sense, he would contradict much of the rest of his discourse. But it is good, that is, either abstracting from circumstances, there are many things in which the state of celibacy has the advantage above the marriage state, or else at this juncture, by the reason of the distress of the Christian Church, it would be a convenience for Christians to keep themselves single, provided they have the gift of continency, meaning self-control. Because marriage is a gift from God, and so is singleness. And I've experienced both. When you're single, it's less hassle. So at the same time, they can keep, right, so it would be convenience for Christians to keep themselves single, provided they have the gift of continency, and at the same time can keep themselves chaste. The expression also may carry in it an intimation that Christians must avoid all occasions of this sin, and flee all fleshly lusts and incentives to them, must neither look on nor touch a woman so as to provoke lustful inclinations. So that's in verse 1. A man should not touch a woman to cohabit with her, but to remain unmarried. You know, if you're not going to get married, then don't touch a woman, because it just provokes lustful inclinations. Right, verse 2. He informs them that marriage, right, let me read verse 2 first. But because of the temptation to impurity and to avoid immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. He informs them that marriage and the comforts and satisfactions of that state are by divine wisdom prescribed for preventing fornication. So this is the cure for fornication. The Greek word for fornication is porneas. It's where we get the word pornography from. So now do you understand where I'm going? Fornication's all sorts of lawless lust. That's what that Greek word means. So lust, yeah. To avoid these, let every man, says he, have his own wife, and every woman her own husband. That is, marry and confine themselves to their own mates, and when they are married, let each render the other due benevolence. Consider the disposition and exigency of each other, and render conjugal duty, which is owing to each other. So that's in the next verse. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, goodwill, kindness, and what is due to her as his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. So in this marriage state, you have to respect one another, and you have to give each other their conjugal rights, kindness, sex. But, you know, in the married state, It's meant to be enjoyed and a joy, you know. And fornication is just, it's basically all manner of lust, porn. And it's sex outside of marriage. And this is what Paul is saying. The cure for that is to get married. Have your own wife and confine yourself to that one mate. You know, sexual sin is a bad habit, just like any other bad habit. You have to confine yourself to that one person. So verse 4, for the wife does not have exclusive authority and control over her own body, but the husband has his rights. Likewise, also the husband does not have exclusive authority and control over his body, but the wife has her rights. Now, some men, and I guess some women, abuse this principle. It doesn't mean to say you control and possess them or own them. It means that the wife has authority over the husband's body, meaning you can't go off and sleep with other women. And likewise, the man has authority in that sense over the woman, as in you give him his conjugal rights. And for as the apostle argues, in the married state, neither person has power over his own body, but has delivered it into the power of the other. The wife hers into the power of the husband, and the husband his into the power of the wife. Note, polygamy. Polygamy is having more than one wife. Or is that bigamy? Polygamy. I think it's the same thing. Note, polygamy, or the marriage of more persons than one, as well as adultery, must be a breach of marriage covenants and a violation of the partner's rights. You know, the Mormons believe in polygamy. It's not right. It's not God's way. Yet in some churches, it's kind of there in a deceptive way, thinking they can go have other women and they can't. So polygamy, or the marriage of more persons than one, yes, having more than one wife, having more persons than one, as well as adultery, must be a breach of marriage covenants. So polygamy and adultery is a breach of marriage covenants and a violation of the partner's rights. So you're violating your partner's rights if you sleep with someone else. Or giving it to someone else, you know. And therefore they should not defraud one another of the use of their bodies, nor any other of the comforts of the conjugal state, appointed of God for keeping the vessel in sanctification and honour, and preventing the lusts of uncleanness, except it be with mutual consent. Oh, let me read that again. Well, in verse 5, it makes more sense. It says, do not refuse and deprive and defraud each other of your due marital rights, except perhaps by mutual consent for a time, so that you may devote yourselves unhindered to prayer. But afterwards, resume marital relations, lest Satan tempt you to sin through your lack of restraint of sexual desire. So what he's saying there is, don't defraud each other, don't deprive each other your marital rights, unless it's by mutual consent, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but afterwards resume marital relations. Otherwise, Satan will tempt you into sexual sin. This is the thing. You've got to be guard against this temptation, because Satan will use that weakness. So you've got to come together to keep Satan out of your marriage and to stop him from tempting you to sexually sin. So don't defraud, don't deprive one another of your conjugal rights within marriage. And it's a cruel thing for a man to do that as well to a woman, and the other way around. But when a man deprives a woman of her conjugal rights and goes off with other women, that is torture, it's abuse, and it brings uncleanness. And, it's not acceptable to God, and it wouldn't be acceptable to the wife either. Um, so I'm just going to read that again. It says, "And therefore they should not defraud one another of the use of their bodies, nor any other of the comforts of the conjugal state, appointed of God for keeping the vessel in sanctification and honour, and preventing the lust of uncleanness, except it be with mutual consent, and for a time only, while they employ themselves in some extraordinary duties of religion, or give themselves to fasting and prayer." So only, you know, you have to be in a mutual agreement that you're doing it for because you're fasting and praying, and you've agreed to, not have sex. And but it has to be an agreement, a mutual agreement, and then come back together. Otherwise, Satan will tempt you. And it's been wise against Satan's temptations. You've got to be one step ahead. And because if there's one thing that he does try all the time, is the lust, the sexual immorality in the church. And this is what Paul's addressing. He knows how he can bring a man down. He knows how he can bring a woman down. But if you're strong and you have continence, self-control, he won't be able to overcome you. And these are guidance for marriage, right? Don't give the devil any leeway. So come together. Don't deprive, don't defraud each other. Note, seasons of deep humiliation require abstinence from lawful pleasures, but this separation between husband and wife must not be for a continuance, lest they expose themselves to Satan's temptations. That's what I'm saying. By reason of their incontinence or inability to contain. Note, persons expose themselves to great danger by attempting to perform what is above their strength, and at the same time not bound upon them by any law of God. If they abstain from lawful enjoyments, they may be ensnared into unlawful ones. The remedies God hath provided against sinful inclinations are certainly best. So lawful, meaning the lawful pleasures of marriage, if they abstain from lawful enjoyments, they may be ensnared into unlawful ones. The husband might wander off watching porn videos, which is totally not acceptable to God. Watching other women, that's adultery, that's breaking the covenant again with God. And sinning against your partner, wife. But God has the remedy. So here he's giving the remedy for marriage, how to keep it pure, basically. Because whether you're single or you're married, as Christians, we've got to keep pure. And one doorway Satan can get in is sexual temptation. If you're not wise, you've got to keep the door shut on him. Okay. So this is marriage guidance. Okay. Yeah, so in verse 5 it says, but afterwards resume marital relations, lest Satan tempt you to sin through your lack of restraint of sexual desire. Verse 6, but I am saying this more as a matter of permission and concession, not as a command or regulation. Um, I've read that bit. You know, the remedies God hath provided against sinful inclinations are certainly best. The apostle limits what he had said about every man's having his own wife in verse 2. I speak this by permission, not of command. He did not lay it as an injunction upon every man to marry without exception. Any man might marry. No law of God prohibited the thing. But on the other hand, not law bound a man to marry so that he sinned. But on the other hand, not law bound a man to marry so that he sinned if he did not. I mean, unless his circumstances required it for preventing the lust of uncleanness. I didn't understand that sentence. I'm going to have to read it again. No law of God prohibited the thing, meaning marriage. But on the other hand, not law bound a man to marry so that he sinned if he did not. I mean, unless his circumstances required it for preventing the lust of uncleanness. For preventing the lust of uncleanness. See, that's the other thing with sexual immorality comes uncleanness. Because it's unclean spirits. Sexual immorality. You know, the devil comes in with unclean spirits. But what he's saying here is a man isn't wrong if he doesn't marry, and he isn't wrong if he does. He's not law bound. He's not law bound to marry, so that he sinned if he did not. I mean, unless his circumstances required it for preventing the lust of uncleanness. Yeah, sleeping around. It's better to get married. It was a thing in which men, by the laws of God, were in a great measure left at liberty, and therefore Paul did not bind every man to marry, though every man had an allowance. No, he could wish all men were as himself. And this is what he says in verse 7. I wish that all men were like I myself am in this matter of self-control, but each has his own special gift from God, one of this kind and one of another. Meaning, singleness is a gift. God gives you the grace, and so is marriage. Marriage is a gift. God gives you the grace for marriage. I believe I'm meant to be married, but I'm constantly thrown into singleness. But I actually have the gift of marriage. I know in my heart I'm supposed to be married. And it's men have to leave their life of fornication and follow God and get married. if you're going to be single, then you have to have continence, self-control, the gift of singleness. Most people want marriage, but some do have a special gift to stay single, just single for God. And that's what Paul was. So let's see what he says here. And therefore Paul did not bind every man to marry, though every man had an allowance. No, he could wish all men were as himself, as in verse 7. That is, single and capable of living continently in that state. There were several conveniences in it, which at that season, if not at others, made it more eligible in itself. Note, it is a mark of true goodness to wish all men as happy as ourselves, but it did not answer the intentions of divine providence as well for all men to have as much command of this appetite as Paul had. It was a gift vouchsafed to such persons as infinite wisdom thought proper. Every one hath this proper gift of God, one after this manner, and another after that. Natural constitutions vary, and where there may not be much difference in the constitution, different degrees of grace are vouchsafed, which may give some a greater victory over natural inclination than others. Note, the gifts of God, both in nature and grace, are variously distributed. Some have them after this manner, and some after that. Paul could wish all men were as himself, but all men cannot receive such a saying, save those to whom it is given. Now it mentions Matthew 19, verse 11. Jesus replied, not everyone can accept this word, but only those to whom it has been given. Yeah. So Paul was single, and he was single-minded for God, but it was a special grace that God had given to him. And he had continence, self-control. But as I say, not all men want that. And most men and most women want to be married. I've always wanted to be, but, well, still battling that one. Yeah. So, verse 8. But to the unmarried people and to the widows, I declare that it is well, good, advantageous, expedient, and wholesome for them to remain single, even as I do. Matthew Henry says, he sums up his sense on his head. I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, to those in a state of virginity or widowhood, it is good for them if they abide even as I. There are many conveniences, and especially at this juncture, in a single state to render it preferable to a married one. It is convenient, therefore, that the unmarried abide as I, which plainly implies that Paul was at that time unmarried. But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. This is God's remedy for lust. Are you hearing this? This is God's remedy for lust. Get married. Verse 8. But to the unmarried people and to the widows I declare that it is well, good, advantageous, expedient, and wholesome for them to remain single, even as I do. Last verse, verse 9. But if they have not self-control, restraint of their passions, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to be aflame with passion and tortured continually with ungratified desire. Now, when I read that verse, I thought of a husband who doesn't gratify his wife's desires and goes off with other people, and that is absolute torture. And so, in one sense, it's bad to be in a marriage like that. and you're better off single. But if a woman what he says is, but if they cannot contend, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. You know, this is God's remedy for lust. The fire may be quenched by the means he has appointed, and marriage, with all its inconveniences, is much better than to burn with impure and lustful desires. Yeah. It's better to have them satisfied God's way. Marriage is honourable in all, but it is a duty in those who cannot contain nor conquer those inclinations. Yeah, you see, now this touches on pornography, doesn't it? Lust. Marriage is honourable in all, but it is a duty in those who cannot contain nor conquer those inclinations. Yes, so don't sleep around, get married and honour God and marriage. So I came on tonight to do this quick Bible study, and let's just have a quick look at the breakdown in ChatGPT. So I looked at this earlier. So we're looking at 1 Corinthians 7 verses 1 to 9. So the context, Paul wrote this letter to the church in Corinth, responding to questions they had about marriage, singleness, and sexual relations. Corinth was a city known for its immorality, and believers were struggling with how to live holy lives in a corrupt culture. Yes, so Paul's letters to the Corinthians, there's two big letters to the Corinthians. First one is bigger than the second, because there is quite a few a few chapters to go in this Corinthians, the letter to the Corinthians by Paul. They needed a lot of guidance, a lot of wisdom, and a lot of sorting out, especially on immorality. So, key themes and lessons. Number 1, celibacy and marriage. It's in verses 1 and 2. Paul acknowledges that celibacy is good, but because of sexual immorality, marriage is a safeguard against sin. This highlights the reality of human temptation and the God-ordained purpose of marriage. Number 2, this is in verses 3 to 5, mutual responsibility in marriage. Marriage involves mutual giving. Spouses have a duty to fulfill each other's physical needs. Neither spouse has complete autonomy over their own body in marriage. They belong to each other. Temporary abstinence is allowed for prayer, but should not be prolonged to avoid temptation. It's common sense, isn't it? 3, the gift of singleness. This is verses 6 and 7. Paul sees singleness as a gift that allows for undistracted devotion to God. However, he acknowledges that not everyone has this calling. Marriage is also a gift. 4, advice to the unmarried and widows in verses 8 and 9. Paul encourages singleness for those who can handle it, as it allows greater focus on God. I like that. Those who can handle it. However, if someone struggles with self-control, marriage is the better option rather than falling into sin. Application questions. Do I view marriage as a God-given safeguard and a place of mutual giving rather than self-seeking? How do I approach my relationships with the spirit of self-control or with selfish desires? If I am single, am I using my singleness to serve God fully? Am I honouring my spouse or future spouse in how I live my life today? Now that's a good question, isn't it? So you've got to honour your future spouse as well as, am I honouring my spouse or future spouse in how I live my life today? That's a really good question. Are you living chaste? Are you living moral? So this is like marriage counselling, isn't it? Marriage guidance. So this is 1 Corinthians 7 verses 1 to 9. So that's my Bible study tonight. But I think it's a really important chapter to look at the importance of marriage, the gift of both marriage and singleness. And now marriage, what did it say now? Marriage cures, secure for lust, and a safeguard against sin. But some people have a completely upside down view, and that's because they're in fornication and they're not honouring God and marriage. And they go get their physical needs met with some stranger, and instead of allowing God to give them the mate, the permanent love connection, marriage, sex is meant for marriage. So marriage is the cure for lust and keeping pure, and obviously both devoted to God. So in some ways this world trashes marriage, but we have to honour God and marriage. I'm having my hair cut this week. It's too long. So I'm just going to pray now. So thank you, Jesus, for giving us the fresh guidance on marriage and how to address singleness and marriage and to guard against sin, because we don't want to fall into fornication. And fornication is a sin, as we looked at last week. So, Father, I thank you that you've given me the gift of marriage, and help me, Lord. Help us all to keep marriage pure, keep the marriage bed pure, and yes, to respect each other, and to respect God, and to respect one another, and not to defraud each other or deprive each other of conjugal rights. So, Lord, I just thank you for the blessing of marriage, and thank you for the guidance, and thank you that marriage is a cure against lust. Yeah. And too many people struggling with that these days. And with so much pornography in the world, Lord, it's filth, and it really is distasteful, and it's not good. It's evil. And but I thank you, Lord, that you've called us to live a life of purity, which is what Paul's writing about. So help us today, Lord, to live in purity, whether we're single or married. And if we're not married yet, bring the husband along, Jesus, I pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So I shall go now. I've got work in the morning, but I just wanted to do this Bible study. I'm still editing the one from last week. Now I've got another one to edit, this one. So I'll say good night. God bless. Have a good week. And stay pure. Okay. Bye-bye.